wonderful to welcome you to the HERMANN LEVI LAB, which is part of our artistic research project and exhibition dedicated to the conductor, collector, literature buff, cultural environmental shaper, so to speak, Hermann Levi, in the second half of 19th century. And one of our topics is actually the spot where the whole thing happens in the university town of Giessen. And it was very interesting for us when we got invited and we discovered how the place looks like, and that there is a building by the Swedish architect Sven Markelius. And this building is actually on the former spot of the liberal synagogue where Hermann Levi's father was the rabbi and Hermann Levi spent his childhood. And so we tried to connect all parts of history, from music to art to architecture and to the history of the city in our project. And it's a great pleasure that we will see and hear our friend Wilfried Wang, Professor Dr. Wilfried Wang, who is an architect and architectural historian, former director of the Museum of Architecture in Frankfurt, professor at the University of Texas at Austin, a curator of various groundbreaking exhibitions like Demopolis at the Academy of Arts in Berlin. He's also an honorary member of the Swedish Academy of the Arts and received his honorary doctorate from the Royal College of Technology in Stockholm. And so it's not astonishing that he is actually interested or he's knowledgeable, truly knowledgeable on the work of Sven Markelius, a super modernist architect. And before we do that, I will give you a brief introduction, not into the topic so much, because we've done that several times, but into the building and how we tried to correspond to the architecture and to build kind of gaps inside the building to bring modernity and visual arts, our installation together. And I will start a brief introduction. So what you see here is the interior design where we are. It's the former library. At the beginning, when he constructed the building, there was the library. And when they got a new town hall, the library moved over and they got, this became an art space. And it's an art space that's widely used by the city and by artists, by scholars, by the university, and so on. It's a very, very lively environment there. So it suits very much Sven Markelius' idea. And what you see is an old picture of the Congress Hall, but I think we'll see more of that. And what's also interesting is this triangle between the three spots we are using. The Congress Hall with Kids Kunst im Zentrum here, the former library. That's where the thing takes place. And you see the Congress Hall as the third picture on the bottom. Across is the theater, but that was built actually in 1901 after Levi passed away in 1900. And up there you see this very active and lively town hall, new city hall of Giessen, where the Hermann Levi Hall is inside. And why we thought about, doing it on that spot is we discovered this memorial stone dedicated or remembering the synagogue that had been destroyed in November 1938, where the fire brigade was very helpful. And there is, and so we said, what, such a small stone? Who was it? And we discovered that Hermann Levi's father, Benedikt Levi, was the rabbi there. And actually, young Hermann learned to play the piano, the music, to perform inside the synagogue, which is a beautiful story. And on the right, you see this synagogue, a very kind of classical building. And so you see how the Congress Hall overlaps with the former grounds of the synagogue. And after we had started digging into this whole topic in 2019, there was this very interesting, they started digging out the grounds. Now they are closed again, but there will be kind of a memorial, larger memorial site, whatever they have in mind. And we took this very interesting ground floor of the synagogue and combined it with the picture and put it inside the exhibition. Here you see the installation, which the pictures are shaped exactly by the structure of the building, because there were bookshelves always in between. So we simply combined all pictures and created collages for the walls. And you see that it's a duplex story thing. It's like a theater, which it is also used by the theater department. You see the furniture is still original, this Harry Bertoyas, and what's important is the stairs that lead down to the other part of the exhibition. And so you see how we kind of went for the walls, the sizes, and the stair is so important. So we answered it with a carpet of the baton, honorary baton for Hermann Levi. And of course, one of those niches in the lower part of the exhibition. Now you can see, look up, and as I said, and you see how people act on this stair. And here you see Hermann Levi, the beautiful portrait of Franz von Lehenbach of Hermann Levi.
Thank you very much for the introduction, which I can only assume introduced the exhibition and the reason why we're talking about Sven Markelius. I have been in touch with Renata about this topic for some time, and I'm very happy to be able to fill in a little bit of the enormous spectrum of kind of a fantastic biographical interchange of so many thoughts and lives. And I'm happy to add another layer that addresses the issue of why Markelius was important, why he was chosen in Giessen, and what his legacy was about. So I will begin with introducing a few earlier buildings before we actually look at the citizens or the People's Hall, and maybe address the question of what to do with the recently discovered archaeological or the remains of the synagogue that was constructed in opposite the theater. So I will begin with looking at the Helsingborg concert hall that was completed in 1932 and was part of a competition that was actually officially started in 1927. And this is what it looks like in Helsingborg, which is a city on the southwestern coast of Sweden, opposite Denmark. And this is what it looks like today. It's a white building. It has a kind of linear structure, a very tall volume with an entrance component at the front that faces this square. Now, this postcard from 1930 shows quite revealingly the proximity of this concert hall, which you see here on the left, in immediate context of the port. And in front, you see St. Jürgen's Platz. That was a conventional late 19th century square with the tree growth. And in fact, the traffic now is different. The traffic now is led down this street, but remember, Sweden was right-hand drive, and so this was actually also a way that cars would approach, and they would approach this entrance volume. So that explains a little bit why, in urban design terms, the volume of the concert hall itself and the entrance hall are split. But another thing is that this site here on the right was dedicated for the theater that was constructed a few years later. So you see here a kind of almost an echo of the much discussed and idealized industrial architecture. And that explains a little bit why this is so sparse in its exterior expression, why there's this kind of a external pillar structure that dresses the facade. This comes as a surprise to most people, because this was a preliminary design by Markelius of 1926 and shows the volume with a very, very conventional Greek front, temple front. And this design of 1926 actually coincides with the 1926 completion of Eva Tengboom's concert hall in Stockholm. Sweden was a nation that enjoyed a kind of a continuous engagement with neoclassicism. There was a period of Swedish architecture that was called Swedish Grace, and it embraced the idea of classical architecture, but in a kind of very attenuated set of proportions. So you get this kind of mute elegance, if you could say that. And Tengboom's concert hall, sorry, this is a wrong title. This is actually in Stockholm. But this concert hall was a kind of a highly influential volume construction that Markelius was referring to. And he, a few years later, he developed something a little bit more abstract. But you see, there's a portico here, a connecting volume with staircases, and the main volume of the concert hall. Now, the program included two large spaces. It included a cinema and a concert hall. So the concert hall is on the upper level, and the cinema is actually below. So you have two volumes, two huge volumes on top of each other. I took kind of a slight detour because the question is why neoclassicism is such an important influence in Swedish architecture. And you see one of the most important and influential Swedish architects of the 20th century was Sigurd Leverentz, and his design for the Resurrection Chapel in the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm, which was completed in 1925, so 1 year before the Tengboom concert hall, stood or stands at the end of a long promenade for the processions, and the main volume of the chapel is actually at an angle in an asymmetric way. Very curious, but it has to do with the idea of life as a continuity, so that one enters through these large doors and then is within the main chapel space, but one doesn't come out the same way as one enters, but one leaves to the side. And that is to mark the idea of a circularity of life as opposed to one where the destiny is death. Death is not a destiny. Death is just a stage in the cycle of life. So this volume, which sparked a lot of discussion in Swedish architecture, explains this idea of the possibility of returning to the kind of picturesque Greek composition that you see in the Erechtheion on the Acropolis, and has this kind of a very erudite interpretation of classical architecture. This is the plan. So that's the main chapel volume. This is the porch, entrance porch, and that would be the exit to the right. And here you see the plan for the Helsingborg concert hall by Markelius, and you see the main volumes, the cinema here and the concert hall above, with the entrance foyer spaces in a very remarkable, almost Baroque arrangement of staircases, and a very elaborate sectional development in the staircases. So, okay, so Markelius establishes an idea of a transition from neoclassical architecture to modern architecture, even though there is this echo of neoclassicism in the facade. In 1930, he is part of the major exhibition called the Stockholm exhibition, which 1930, which marked the beginning of modern architecture in Sweden. And out of that grew an interest in the social movement that was associated with the modern architecture. And he came across the writings of Alva Myrdal, who was a pedagogue, a campaigner for women's rights, and somebody who had thought about what to do with public housing and what needed to be done in terms of accommodating different programmatic functions. She was later a diplomat for Sweden, and she was a peace activist engaged in the disarmament negotiations in New York, and Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1982. So she was a distinguished radical social democrat who influenced the design of this collective house, which has a street facade, and that differs quite significantly from the flat 1920s, 1930s housing schemes, creating a kind of an openness, an amount of green. And this is a courtyard facade with a little garden on the other side. And what is significant about this is the provision of social functions at the ground level, often much neglected in modern housing. There's an entrance area here, and there are different kinds of social facilities here. There's a collective kitchen. There is a reading area for children and play area, and there's a bar for the community. And on the above levels, there is no real kitchen, which is something that Markelius and Myrdal took over from the Russian housing projects of the 1920s and early 1930s. What you had was a collective kitchen, and there was an elevator that served the floors with food, so that you would have this idea what the Russians were thinking about, that the chores, the daily chores that were usually loaded onto women would be removed from women, and the women would have time to work or to look after children, and that you would have these kinds of facilities. You'd have daycare facilities in the same building, including little pool for kids to play with water. There's the reading program, there's a music program. They even had an internal telephone system in the building. So these are some aspects of the kind of innovatory thoughts about programmatic provisions for a more stable housing idea that would allow both parents to work. Okay, so this is the view of the bar as it was installed in 1930s, 35. So, okay, that's that kind of a remarkable and very, very influential collective house. And the whole notion of collective, of course, today, doesn't carry the same radical import as it used to. But Markelius was then able to expand his work and his vision to address the needs of modern society and how it should be represented. He was in charge of remodeling the downtown area of Stockholm, which started after the Second World War, and completely remodeled the old downtown, which by today's standards, you would say this is kind of incredibly radical modernization program. And he was in charge of the urban design, for example, of the high-rise buildings right next to the Norrmalm, the Northern Ireland core. He was also in charge of a number of new towns, including the famous Vällingby, kind of a new town area now for over 60,000 people. which at the center had commercial facilities, social facilities, and high rises. This was an incredibly important and influential new town model based in part on British ideas, but further developed in Sweden. Now, with the kind of a larger urban design and new town projects, he was also in charge of, was invited after the Second World War to be part of this large team that was designing the United Nations facility. And here's a plaque that commemorates those architects that were involved, including the chief of the planning department of the team, Wallace Harrison, and Sven Markelius is one of the architects mentioned, amongst others, with Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer. And he was the designer of the Economic and Social Council Chamber. So different architects had different tasks. And for the reasons that of the success of this particular meeting space, he was given the, after competition, the task to design one of the many citizens' houses or citizens' halls in Stockholm. A long design process. Folkets hus means people's house. And it stands in the northern area of the inner city on a square, and is quite, well, you'd say, a kind of a very simple, if not boring facade, right? It looks like a kind of an office building. The only indication that there's any culture going on or anything, activity going on, is this signboard, which addresses or shows what kind of cultural facilities and activities are going on. This is another view from the 1960s. And the section is remarkable. Now, in the same way as the concert hall for Helsingborg had two spaces on top of each other, the cinema below the concert hall, here we have a theater space with a fly tower. And this is a conference hall. And remarkable, I think, I mean, in architectural terms, is how the circulation space is squeezed or occupies a space in between. And offers this enormous vista, almost the entire depth of the plan. And I think it's just an incredible project. This is the view of the main entrance foyer. Entrance is from the left. This is the conference hall, just an enormous space, and it fills almost the entire width of the project. And here's just an indication of the kind of compactness of the plan. So he has two other smaller conference spaces as part of this series of circulation elements. This is the cloak facility below, and one then goes up these staircases individually to reach another foyer space before one goes into these conference facilities or into the theater. And there are another two small theaters next to each other, right? So this is an incredible kind of compaction of and all sorts of meeting spaces. And it's, I think, one of the most important pieces of architecture that Markelius was able to complete. Now, I show this also a little bit in contrast to the contemporary way of designing, and the OMA, I think, is a very clear case in point, where you also have different kinds of performance spaces collated, but rather than to compact the composition, it's maximizing its kind of volumetric gymnastics. And I think this couldn't be a clearer contrast to Markelius' rather self-effacing presence in the city. This is the maximization of presence. right? And Markelius is this kind of a almost, yeah, not present in the city. So we're coming to the third movement and the penultimate section on the People's Hall in Giessen, which was following very, very shortly after the completion of the Folketshus, which clearly made an impact amongst social democrats, because Sweden, together with the new towns and with the then contemporary architecture, has been or was at the time a very much observed country for architecture. And I began with Helsingborg because I wanted to show that, you know, the volumetric composition of this meeting space with a separate entrance volume is something that he adheres to. Even the use of these pillars as elements that give the kind of box of structure and allude to some form of classicism. Here's another contemporary photograph and another view which shows the relationship of the People's Hall, as it was originally called, now it's called the Congress Hall, how it stands opposite Ferdinand Hellmer's theater that was completed in the early 20th century. Yeah, so what you have is a main volume that contains meeting space that can be subdivided, a restaurant area, and some other smaller meeting spaces. There's a library here. This is the main entrance, the main approach from this door. There are other entrances here and here and here. So it has been a volume that has addressed different sides of the surroundings. It's not been that warmly welcomed because of its rather somber use of brick. And it looks quite strict from the outside. So architecturally, I think it's been much less successful than the building in Helsingborg, which is much brighter and much more joyous in this kind of a circulation experience. And of course, that has clouded its trajectory over the last decades. So, final question is, what should happen now that the remains of the synagogue have been found? As recently as the end of 2022, with the publication in the early part of last year, there are fragments. And just going back a little bit in history, here is a aerial photograph from 1930 showing the theater by Fellner and the synagogue. So they were actually standing opposite each other. The synagogue came first and the theater afterwards. And it was part of the so-called Südanlage, the southern ring of parks. So it was an extension of the city in the kind of, almost in the idea of the Viennese Ringstraße. So it was a prominent space. And this is a photograph taken in May 1945 by the Americans, and it shows you the theater here and a gap opposite, of course, because the theater here is an enlargement, and the gap opposite because the synagogue was burnt down in the Reichspogromnacht. This shows you the area in front of the theater with kind of a quasi English layout of a series of flowering areas. And here is another very interesting photograph that shows you the relationship between these two buildings. So, interestingly enough, there was no visual connection desired, it seems, given the fact that these are densely planted trees. So, here's a photograph of a few days after the conflagration in 1938, and how it looks today. So we have the theater here, Markelius People's Hall or Congress Hall, and then the new administrative spaces here with the very large public space. The city of Giessen has been rethinking what to do with this old downtown area. And, besides the pedestrianization, there's an implementation of a greening of all of this, also in relation to climate change needs to address some of these changes. And of course, maybe you've heard that there have been some proposals by architects that were requested from the city of Giessen to raise the question of what to do with this particular site, whether it should be an area that memorializes the presence of a large or relatively large Jewish community in Giessen up to 1938. What to do, what kind of strategies to pursue, but these are all quite small scale interventions or proposals. And I think if the city could be maybe moved to think at the larger scale of the urban design and kind of landscape involvement, then perhaps there's a possibility to think this area as a whole in a kind of a larger, more generous urban scale. And that is not solely developed or devoted to vehicular traffic, but could, in the same way as there's a kind of a pedestrianization of this area, maybe even dedicated to a shared space concept, so that there's kind of a unification of all these important cultural facilities, religious facilities around this area. Anyway, that is a kind of a thought that occurred to me in thinking about this particular question of what to do with the archaeological remains and what to do with paying respect and honoring the lives and the presence and the impact of the Jewish community that has been, as part of the Holocaust, eliminated also from Gießen. So with that, I give over to Renata, the chair of our session.
Yes, thank you, Wilfried. This is incredibly telling. I wished they could hear your talk in Gießen as well. I hope that our exhibition has kind of created an awareness. Maybe we could switch back. Great. I think that's better. We see each other. Yeah. You haven't seen my introduction at the beginning, but I was simply showing the inside of the space and how we worked with it. Because what we found interesting was this, we were invited and said, do what you like. And we walked around and we saw this memorial stone. And we said, what? A synagogue here in the middle, Berliner Platz? That's amazing. Who was that? And then we found out, hey, that was the father of our friend Hermann Levi, whom we had discovered in Munich, the Leviana in the National Library in Munich. So the Bavarian National Library in Munich. And so then we discovered who that was. And it's really somehow the idea was to bring him back to memory, because Levi was such an important figure on many levels. And then there was this side, this dark side, that he got humiliated, neglected. I mean, really badly treated by Cosima and Richard Wagner. Honestly, with this woke society right now, I think before every opera of Wagner, they should say, Wagner is the quintessential anti-Semite. Be aware of the music, because he wrote that book, what was it, Jews in music and how bad, and that Jews have no taste and whatever he wrote about. It's so disgusting that you can't read it. It was entirely adapted by the Nazis later. And so no wonder they loved this tra-la music, but many others like it too. So we looked at this environment, which was like pop culture. It was, the most successful place in the musical universe was Bayreuth. And the best orchestra in, well, besides Vienna, of course, but our Vienna, but besides Bayreuth was Munich. And so Levi had all the tools to take, to shape something up, but he had to deal with the devil. And so this was also something we questioned in relation to our time today, where, the bourgeoisie, it seems, is accepting a sort of anti-Semitism, just like during the time when Levi was there. And when he became this real guru of Munich social, how should I say, high society, and when he started collecting German art. But his taste in music was international, so it's very.
Yeah, I think your presentation. I mean, you've recorded your presentation a few weeks after the opening of your exhibition, which
yes,
is a very fascinating
website.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating condensation of many things. The question that your archaeological work and your kind of artistic work brings up is, how can we sensitize people to these complex links on the one hand, and how can we engender a respect for the contributions that people have, such as Levi and others have made to the, the kind of realm of music, of course. I mean, without a conductor, music doesn't come to life.
Well, Levi also translated the 3 Da Ponte operas from Italian to German, and they were mostly played. Several people did that, but it was mostly played. So we were very happy that the Stadttheater, this beautiful Fellner and Helmer building, and that the people cooperated with us and did a matinee with Levi's most admired music. And actually, it's the music that Telemann takes really on the program of Levi. That's what Frieder and I found out. So, we also spoke to Telemann about it. It's really important. And I'm quite happy that Telemann is now in town, and we will approach him if we could, if there could be, not we, but if there could be really, how should I say, an evening dedicated to Levi and the musicians he brought up, even people who were against him, like Richard Strauss.
Renata, I think there's that level of engagement and memorialization, if you can put it like that. The other one you mentioned in your presentation, your discussion, where you referred to the fact that the main space in the Giessen town hall is called the Hermann Levi Halle.
And they use it every day. It is a monument really dedicated to him.
So, then there's that kind of a presence of Hermann Levi. But the thing is, what presence should the synagogue or the remains of the synagogue have in relation to the city, in relation to the site?
Very true.
Because if you name a space, that's kind of one thing. That's one level of respect that you pay. But if you actually spatialize or formalize something, the form of presence, or even if you give some kind of presence of Jewish life back to the city of Gießen at that position, that would be even more powerful, right? So the most powerful thing would be to construct some building, right? But not only, and this is what my point is not to construct something just for the sake of reconstructing things, but to embed it in a common ground. And that's to say, if there is a public space that includes the town hall, the theater, and the conference hall, Congress hall, in one shared space, as it's called. This is a kind of traffic engineer's jargon, but in this case, it actually means that you're sharing a public space with some of the most important political, social, cultural, religious facilities, and would have a completely different level of significance if you acknowledge the former presence of the synagogue in that way. So that's all I'm saying. As opposed to, as opposed to putting some benches, not benches, stone concrete blocks there where people could sit, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's
right. Renata found out that the city of Gießen has all the models of the important buildings in Gießen, but she found out instantly where is the synagogue. So now they are going
our first visit to
build
Gießen.
the model of synagogue, and for sure you need content, and for sure it can be done with music because Hermann Levi really was the closest friend of Johannes Brahms in the beginning, and he was instrumental for making Brahms famous, and they really worked together in Karlsruhe for 8 years before he moved to Munich. And that friendship broke up because he completely fell in love with Wagner, and Brahms couldn't stand that. But next to it, he really supported Bruckner. Bruckner would have been not so important without Levi. Levi really brought him to show his great art, and that's what Renata mentioned. When you look at the program that Thielemann puts together, Brahms, Bruckner, and Wagner, it's really funny. So in a way, he follows Hermann Levi. And when you look at the most famous play that Hermann Levi directed in 1882, Thielemann plays it in to the second exactly the same time. So you would, is he copying him or whatever? So obviously he has a big admiration for Levi.
And so has Barry Kosky, as we know, his wonderful Meistersinger from 2017. When we approached him and said Levi, he said, I love Levi. I love Levi. He is so wonderful. And it's really true. When you get close to Levi, you see what a positive character he was. So all these attacks against him was nothing, because he had his artists and so on. And we found out that the art he collected belonged partly to his friend Konrad Fiedler before. He married Fiedler's widow. I think they were lovers before, but never mind. That's just my theory. So because they knew each other and lived close by and all that. And so he's not named in any collections. We found that out already in the New Pinakothek and so on. We can't find his books, which are presumably in Weimar. We can't find his Goethe books. He was an expert on Goethe, but the names, all Jewish names, were erased. And so when Eugenie Schumann, the daughter of Clara and Robert Schumann, wrote her memoirs, we found out that she was already asked to leave out Jewish names. And sometimes the Nazis didn't recognize which names were Jewish, and with figures, my God, how annoying, and so you would, but she has a whole chapter dedicated to Levi and describes him, because Levi was like a father to Clara Schumann's children. And so we went to Baden-Baden and looked how that functioned. Baden-Baden is a place from our student times. We know it so well. We did a book as students about Baden-Baden, so funny. And many paths cross between Levi and our life. So it's also a weird thing. But I just wish somebody would say, this is a program that has been shaped by Hermann Levi. You know, I would like Thielemann to say that, and I will tell him that he should say, I've learned from him. This is like living memory.
That would be very interesting, whether Thielemann would, whether he knew of Levi or knows of Levi.
Yes, sure.
Absolutely. If he knows of him, and to what extent he would actually be an admirer of him. So
I'm sure he's an admirer, because the way he performs this music is so significant. So there are all these discussions in it, and we are now putting together the catalog after the show. And this is so, it's like a growing project. You could write 20 books about what plays together and how things, but what you said about the center of town, Berliner Platz, the square, main square, and the greenery, there is greenery missing. It is very kind of noisy, there are buses and zooming. And also the building, the Kongresshalle, is very lively. They use it every day. And there, as you showed, there is a garden, and you can enter the art space through the garden and from the back. So there are several entrances, how they use it. There are book clubs, there are chess clubs, it's really a center of democracy. I thought actually it's like what Joseph Beuys calls wait a minute, social sculpture. That's what it is. It's more than just architecture, but the disturbing part is it's very closed off. It looks like a fortress. And today we want to have open buildings, you know?
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's been a competition, a limited competition, which has rendered 3 projects, and these have shown in different ways how you can open the building to the ground floor level to the surroundings. And I think that they are quite interesting and worth developing. I think the most important thing to remember in the context of, you know, difficult regulations that conservationists impose on architects and clients and owners is that I believe that Markelius is an architect who would not object to the alteration of his building had he known of what other things were around the site. I mean, I'm not sure whether he was informed that the synagogue was actually on part of this, beneath his foundations, but I mean, it was not common for architects to travel a lot during construction periods. I can't imagine that you can conduct excavations for the foundations, especially with the existing finds or the remains of the foundations that were so-called discovered a few years ago, that they didn't know when they were constructing this building in the 1960s. They must have come across the foundations of the synagogue.
Wilfried, there is a similarity to the Philharmonics in Berlin. The T4, I remember when Frieder and I worked on the T4 competition, actually the house was there. It's also built on the grounds of this, you know, murderous building. And so we thought we would outline it in the street, just make a drawing. You don't need to do much more, but of course they prefer to do something more bombastic. But I think it happened often, but, you know, politics were quite different, and the awareness.
Well, okay, I mean, now we are in a completely different context, political context after the 7th of October, 2023. You know, everybody is saying we're much more sensitive to these issues.
Mm-hmm.
I think the city of Giessen now has to take some basic decisions what to do.
They have, really, they have. They are going towards, you know, they are really going to point it out and to memorialize it in some way or another. Yes, Hetty?
Yes, sorry, I have to leave soon. And I also, I mean, when I got the invitation, I had no idea what it would be, or I don't.
Sorry that we are.
No, it's fine. I mean, so I have no idea what I would encounter, but I thought maybe I can give a small reaction. Yeah, I'm Hetty Burke. I'm the director of the Jewish Museum Berlin. And so it's very interesting, and also I got a good impression now of the exhibition, so that is nice, because a lot had been told about it by Renata and Frieder, but and also thank you for the architectural introduction. I think it's a beautiful building, also as closed as it is. I think it's really beautiful, but I don't know, but architecture is not my field, so I won't say anything about that. But I have the feeling, if you know, this idea of bringing something or to put a signal of the Jewish history in Giessen and of this synagogue. I'm not sure if that is then being served by showing the remnants of a synagogue that are, you know, was not even so old. I mean, these kind of excavations, always you think you look at the Roman era or something, or the Middle Age or something really old. This and it's also so sad and dead. So this doesn't give any doesn't bring back the idea of the Jewish life that was there. So I think it's much better to maybe forget about, I mean, I would think, okay, it's good to document it and people know it was there, we know what the remains look like, but to do something with the material because like this, what is it called? City or council house, Gemeinschaftshaus.
Yeah. Congress Hall.
There's a lot of life and a lot going on in the synagogue. There was also a lot going on and a lot of life, not just the services, but people would get together and for learning, etc. So also a very lively thing. And then you just see some old bricks, you know, in the ground. It's very sad.
Yeah.
So,
well,
if you have in this Congress hall, there's so much going on. So you can also maybe make a presentation or a reminder, or also outside, not just this small stone, but maybe
they closed it again. They closed it, and they are going to build something like a new entrance there. So it will be enclosed, but they decided that they will close the fundaments and make it, as you say, more lively, more interactive. What I found interesting was what Wilfried showed, the trees, that actually the trees were interrupting the view between theater and synagogue. I had the fantasy, of course, that there was a lively exchange, but no, it's probably not. So I don't know, but it's a very interesting task for the city, and they are taking it on. They are discussing it widely, and the mayor is a very open-minded figure. So I'm quite positive about it.
It came as a shock, Renata. It came as a shock because they thought, let's extend the entrance hall. And suddenly they found something in the earth. And they're, oh, what happened? So, and history came back. And suddenly people were talking about the destruction of the synagogue, where the fire police had to enter the building because the fire didn't really start well. So they really helped to put that synagogue on fire. And it came out in a trial in 48, and nobody could remember anything who was participating, and for sure some did, but in the end nobody was found guilty. And so that whole story came up again. And for sure, as Hetty said, it's not a Roman basement, and they closed it again, and now they will have a hologram projection on the facade during the night. So that's what they are going to do, and what Wilfried mentioned, some concrete benches in front, or blocks. And so in the end, it's not really a very intelligent solution, but they felt the need to do something, but you need content, and that's what Hetty said already. For sure, you can use the Congress Center and the Hermann Levi Hall in the town hall to do something that really reflects the history of the city and the impact of Levi's father, Benedikt, who really introduced the organ into the synagogue, and Hermann played the organ in that synagogue. So if Hermann Levi's work is reflected in daily, or not daily, but every year they should have for his birthday on November 7th, like Renata's birthday, they should have
accidentally
something. And funny enough, we found out that the famous Parsival performance in Bayreuth, conducted by Hermann Levi, that's my birthday, the 26th of July. So very weird when we stepped into all these dates. Anyway, so with music, you really can build a bridge, and his close connection to Clara Schumann, if you have a chance to read the letters, hundreds of letters exchanged between Clara Schumann and Hermann Levi, you really treat him like a friend if you read those wonderful letters. So he comes alive instantly.
And well, thank you. This is basically like the close-up, and I just thought we should continue discussing such architecture topics, Wilfried. I think it's wonderful to do it more online whenever people have time. And also what gives me a great pleasure is that the school children really kind of adapted our exhibition. They go there, they play the music there, they discuss it, they photograph themselves as Levi. It is a lively, somehow we managed to bring this figure back to the spot where he spent his childhood. So I think it is a lively thing. And he was an extraordinary figure and such an art lover. I mean, also visual arts, and you know, Anselm Feuerbach and all these Lehnbach who adored him and so on. It's super moving. Yeah, that is the Lehnbach portrait, which I adore, and it's here in our collection in. His wife gave it to the National Gallery in Berlin, and it's such an incredible portrait of this wild, passionate person who worked from 6 in the morning till 10 at night, and then went off with Brahms and to Karlsruhe nightlife, and as Barbara and